Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mia and I run Sticky Kitten Crafts. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than we normally do. So typically you may have found me previously because I do a lot of videos on my markets. I do a lot of market prep and market recap videos. However, I've been kind of dabbling in something new recently. Not necessarily new to me, but just really been kind of changing up how I've been working, and that is I've been making a lot of crochet tapestry patterns and I've been working them. I'm just trying to finish up my first tapestry pattern, and I will get this posted on my website before this video goes live, or kind of in tandem. That way you can review this video if you have questions about making tapestry patterns. So today we're going to kind of talk through the pattern and just talk about some tips and tricks that you should know when creating tapestry. So I'm going to try to include little check-in sections down at the bottom. You can use this video for really doing any sort of tapestry pattern. It doesn't have to be mine, but I will kind of talk about how I lay my patterns out and what you'll be finding in there, just to make it easier in case this may be your first time doing a tapestry piece. So to get started, just a little bit about the kind of pattern and what you will need to do a tapestry pattern. I would say you need to have at least an intermediate crochet ability, maybe an advanced beginner as well. I've rated the difficulty for this pattern that I'm going to be launching today. This is the pattern I'll be posting on my website, but I've rated this as a 2 out of 5. I think honestly it could be about a 2.5 or 3, but if you know how to color change, you'll be golden. It's really not that complicated. There's also only 6 colors, which actually it does seem like a lot, but you're not using the black very much, only in kind of areas where there aren't a lot more colors, except for right here. So just keep that in mind. But I would say definitely you need to know how to crochet, at least single crochet. That's the stitch that you'll be using. And you need to know how to work in rows. That's probably the bare minimum. Later in the video, we'll talk about how to do color change. So even if you don't know how to do it yet, I think you should be able to pick it up after we talk through some tips and tricks on how to do it. So that is the difficulty level, I would say, that you need to get started. If you're not super familiar with crochet or you're just starting out, I would really just try to get down the basic skill of working in rows, making sure that your rows are nice and clean. You have really clean edges. You have even tension throughout. Those are some really good skills to have before you start working on something like this. But I would say once you have those two kind of skills down, this is the next really good project. And you can always find tapestry patterns that have fewer colors, so it's easier to do the color changes and get done with your first work. Then you can build up that confidence and work on a little bit of a harder one. So that's a quick note about difficulty. Again, we will talk about our stitches. The only one that you will be using for tapestry, at least for the pattern that I'm talking about today, and for most of them I would say, is the single crochet and the chain stitch. We'll talk about kind of how you work the pattern in a couple of minutes. And then also talking about some of the terminology that you'll need to use. So we'll talk about that once we get into kind of what the pattern looks like and how you need to read it. And I did say you only need one stitch. I did actually do this pattern. It is not my own pattern. It is by someone else. I'll post their name up here just so that you can go and find this pattern if you want to make it yourself. But this one was actually made with bobble stitches, which was really fun. So just a note, I guess actually some tapestry will include fun, unique stitches, and this is one example of that. But I would say the vast majority of crochet tapestry that I've seen is pretty much either single crochet or maybe does include some bobble stitches. So let's next talk about some of the materials that you'll need. For most of my crochet tapestry, I would say for all of the ones I've made thus far, I've used an acrylic yarn. I really like to use the Hobby Lobby I Love This yarn because it comes in such a wide variety of colors. I can almost always find what color I am wanting to use. Sometimes the shade might be a little off, but for the most part, they have a lot of shades, a lot of colors, and it's really easy to find what you need. You can use any acrylic yarn though. Michaels obviously has their own line of acrylic yarn. I find that they don't have a lot of color varieties, so I find them a little bit more limiting, but definitely can use their yarn if that's all you have available to you. Red Heart Super Saver yarn, another great one. I think at Michaels they also sell a Craft Smart brand, so really anything will do, just as long as it's that acrylic kind of weight yarn. You could also make it in cotton yarn. I definitely know there are some brands that have a lot of variety of color for cotton yarn, so another thing you could look into if you are not finding the colors you need in your acrylic yarn selection. But I would say I would definitely try to stick with using like all acrylic or all cotton. And even with cotton, it can sometimes get a little bit tricky. Some cottons are a lot softer than say a Lily Sugars and Cream cotton. So definitely pick and choose ones that have very similar texture. You could also mix and match the Michaels acrylic yarn with the Hobby Lobby one. Those two usually work pretty well together, but just make sure it's not gonna have, make it look kind of funny if one actually tends to be a little bit smaller than the other. Hopefully that makes sense. I have done a pattern before where I used a bunch of different yarns from all different brands, and it just kind of turned out a little bit weird because while they were all supposed to be the same weight yarn, they really weren't completely comparable. So the areas where the smaller yarn was used, it kind of, sucked in a little bit, and the other areas got kind of bulky. So just keep that in mind. Next, for your tapestry pieces, you're going to need some wooden dowels. You can find these at any craft store. I find that I can find them typically at Hobby Lobby. At Michaels, they do have wooden dowels, but a lot of times they're pretty short and they come in a package with like 6 or 10 of them. And because they come in that package, they aren't always long enough for what I need for the tapestry pieces. I like that I can get these long ones. That way I can cut it to size, since I do a lot of kind of different varieties of widths and sizes and things. These are a lot more versatile. These, I believe, are $1 a piece, and these are actually 2 separate sizes. This larger one is 5/16, and this other one is a 1/4 inch diameter. So either one of these sizes will do. I've used both of them. The 5/16 definitely gives you a little bit more kind of weight, and then I use the smaller one, the 1/4 inch one, for sometimes smaller pieces or maybe kind of daintier pieces, if you will. But just a note as well, this is kind of like a finishing off tip that we'll maybe discuss again at the end, but you could always add in an additional dowel down at the bottom. It actually wouldn't be a bad idea for me to do that with a piece like this where it's kind of curling on the edges. It might help to hold it down a little bit more. So just keep that in mind. It is always an option. You can add it to the top and bottom if you'd like. Again, it's just up to your next, just kind of the typical crochet pattern things. You're going to need a crochet hook. I like to use these PYRM hooks for a lot of my acrylic work. I use these actually for everything. So this is a PYRM 7. I think it's a 4.5 millimeter hook. I use this one for all of my tapestry work. I find that this size works really good, gives me a good gauge and tension. And then you'll also just need a pair of scissors and a tapestry needle. You'll have a lot of ends that you're going to need to weave in, and when you have a lot of color changes, sometimes it's good to kind of snip off the color and then restart it if you aren't going to be using it for a few rows, so it doesn't get tangled in with your other colors. So that is the kind of about the pattern materials page. Definitely always read through those instructions before you start your pattern. Sometimes there may be a little special piece of information in there that's really helpful. For most tapestries, you can work them up, pretty easily just using the color graph, but it's always nice just to read through what someone has written for you to help set you up for success. So next I'm going to talk about just a couple of kind of tips and tricks, pattern notes that you should keep in mind as you're working up a tapestry crochet pattern. So tapestry is worked in rows. So at the end of each row, you'll chain one, turn, and then single crochet down the next row. The chain stitch does not count towards your total stitch count, but again, just kind of helps give you a little bit more movement and makes it so you're able to cleanly turn around and go back the other way. Most tapestry patterns, you'll have to double check the pattern, read what they're telling you, but most tapestry, you start from the bottom and work your way up. That's just typically what I've seen for most of them. For mine that I will be posting, that is how they will be worked. If it's not, I will leave you a very bright note to tell you that it should be worked in some other direction. But for the most, all tapestry pieces are going to start with a chain, and you'll always chain one more than the number of stitches that your color graph is. So a lot of my color graphs are going to be 60 stitches across. So for most of my patterns, you'll chain 61 and then work in the second stitch from your crochet hook and make those first 60 stitches in your row. I like to, and I'll do a demo of this, what I really like to do is do my chains and then work in the back bumps. That way I have that really nice clean stitch that I can look for when I'm trying to add fringe to the bottom at the end. I just find it a lot easier to do it that way. Obviously you can always chain back on the V's, but I typically find it easier to crochet into the back bumps when going back for that first row. Another thing that I find helpful is I like to have a nice clean row on the bottom, up both the sides and the top where I'm not changing color. So it gives you like a slight border, if you will. I find it hard to change colors on that first chain stitch. So just a note, you could always create a foundation, like your chain, and then do a row one and then start the graph if you were feeling a little bit overwhelmed with doing all of the color changes within the chain stitch. I will note that for all of my patterns, I really try to include that border just so you're not trying to color change on the very last kind of stitch of a row or within that chain stitch. So just a note about how I like to do my patterns. And then my final kind of pro tip that I have for you is download the pattern and either have it on your iPad so you can mark out the rows or print it out. That way you can easily, again, just kind of be crossing off the rows that you are completing. I find that really helpful. And sometimes if you have a lot of color changes, it's nice to even just cross out a few blocks at a time or something like that. I've definitely done that when I've had really kind of aggressive color changes going on or a really big project. So just keeping that in mind as well. Now, next, we're going to talk about the two different types of images that you could be given for a tapestry type pattern. The first one is going to be what I call in my pattern an image chart. So this chart is going to be set up where there's numbers all along the top and then along the sides, and that will indicate the kind of columns and rows that you will be creating. And by columns, I mean like the number of stitches across and then the number of rows up. So for, again, a lot of patterns, you're going to start in the bottom right corner. That will be stitch 1, row 1. That is where you'll start. But it should indicate to you on the pattern usually like begin here, or again, you'll see that kind of intersection of 1 and 1, and you'll know that's where you need to start. For a lot of the tapestry patterns that I've seen, the basically the picture will be cut up into little pixels is what we'll call them. Each pixel indicates a stitch, and there will be kind of some bolder lines that will help you to know, okay, like this block is, 5 stitches, this block is 10 stitches. I'll kind of zoom in here just so you can see in the, okay, here you can see, sorry. So each one of these little blocks represents a stitch, and then these gray lines indicate a grouping of 5 stitches. The black line indicates a grouping of 10 stitches. So just kind of helpful so you kind of know where you're going and know how many stitches you need to be crocheting in certain colors. So that's kind of how you read the image chart. One thing that I note in my pattern is that when you see the odd numbers on the right hand of your page for the rows, and if you are starting on one of those odd number rows, the right side of your work should be facing you. So and let me explain that a little bit better. So for this is the right side of the work. This is the wrong side of the work. This is wrong because it does not look pretty. This is right because it looks how it should. So this is what your kind of graph should be looking like. This would be where I started. This, facing me is that bottom right hand corner. So anytime I was starting an odd number row, the odd numbers were on this side of the graph for me. And then I knew that I would be starting a right side row. And that really just means as you're working up the pattern that the working yarn is on the back of the project. You should never leave any working yarn towards the front of your project because it's going to look really weird. So all of your kind of color passes and your working yarn should try to stay on the wrong side of your work. Hopefully that makes sense. In the pattern, you'll see the abbreviations RS and WS. That means right side and wrong side. So on your color graph, or what we'll talk about in a minute, your color blocking, it will indicate to you whether it is a right side or a wrong side. So you'll know what side your color should stay on. Once you really kind of get in the flow, obviously, you'll know which side is the right side and the wrong side because all of your colors will be where they should be. But when you're starting your graph, it's important to know what side it should be, especially when you do that first row of color change. Okay, the next kind of way you could read one of these patterns, if looking at the graph is way too overwhelming for you, some pattern designers will include, and I include in my patterns, what we call color blocking. And it basically looks like this. So here you'll see row 1, you'll be working on the right side of the work, and it is 60 pink stitches. Next, you'll see row 2 is the wrong side of the work, another 60 stitches in pink. And then row 3, you're back to working on the right side again. So all of those working yarns would be on the back of your project. You'll do 18 pink, 22 gray, 20 pink. So it'll give you just the little blocks of color, and then it will tell you how many of each color you need to be using. So one thing I will note is that obviously in this one we have a lot of gray. So it is kind of hard to tell a little bit the different color grays. That's why I like to I personally use the graph just to see kind of what color should be what compared to the other ones. You can still see it here, but I do just kind of think it's a little bit more difficult for me to read through the color blocking instructions, but definitely still doable. Once you have gone through, worked on your piece, you're going to need to finish it off. So one of the things that I like to do is if I have any lettering on my piece, I like to enhance the letters with some embroidery. So what I'll do is I'll cut a really long string of yarn, and I will kind of just stitch over the crocheted letters with some, here you can kind of see, just with a couple of long stitches, just to make it a little bit more clear and easier to read. You don't have to do that, but it's just something that I like to do. Given the pixelated nature, sometimes things are just not quite as clear as you would hope. I think up here you can kind of see there's like a little pink divot in the D, so it kind of cuts off how your eye is reading the D. So I like to just embroider over it just to make sure it's clear. And that is just, again, another technique that you could use even in other ways on your project. You don't have to do it just for the lettering. You could figure out other cool ways to embroider over your project if you are interested in doing so. Okay, and once your project is done, you are going to need to block your project. So, okay. All right, once your project is done, you're also going to need to block it. I like to cut off all of my yarn, weave it on my ends, and really get the piece to be looking the way that I would want it. And then I do my blocking. You can attach the dowel before you block it. I personally don't like that just because I feel like the dowel adds some extra weight. And you just don't necessarily need to have the dowel attached quite yet. But if you want to still continue, basically when you're done with your piece and sew on the dowel, you could do that and then block it. But it's really, again, just up to preference and how you want to do it. So in order to block a piece, most of my tapestries are not small enough to use my wooden blocking board. This I use mostly for granny squares, but this just has little pegs that you can stick into it. One thing, especially if you're making square pieces, just make sure that everything is even. So make sure that, you know, this corner is in the same row as this one, and then same thing down here. Make sure everything is just evenly spaced so it doesn't look really wonky. For many of my tapestry pieces, I actually use this kit of foam blocks. So these I bought on Amazon. I don't remember how much they were, but I bought these. They all interconnect like puzzle pieces, so you can make the backing as large as you need. Usually I'll put 4 together to block out a tapestry piece. The really nice thing is this has grid lines, so you can again try and line it up, make sure everything is even. And then it comes with just some little push pins that you can attach to the project. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can kind of prep your piece for color blocking. One way is you can submerge your project into a water mixture. I like to use, I think I have it written down here. I like to use the Knit IQ No Rinse Delicate Wash. I'll put maybe a pump of that in some water and just let my project soak in there for maybe 10-15 minutes or so. It helps to just kind of condition the fibers, if you will. It's really meant for wool, but I find that it also helps with acrylic pieces. And again, you don't have to rinse it or anything. You basically just put your piece in the water, submerge it, and then pull it out, wring out your project, squeeze it pretty good just to try and get a lot of the excess water out. And then I'll put it on the block. Another way you could do it, this is what I did for this one, but as you can see, the corners are still a little bit curly. I don't think it worked as well as I was hoping, but you can block the project and then steam it with a steamer. Definitely another great way to do it. I usually find though that it just doesn't work as well as kind of fully submerging the project and then blocking it when it's fully kind of wet. And then if you do that, you need to let the project fully dry on the blocks. I honestly like to put it next to one of my air vents. I have like floor air vents, so I usually will set it next to one of those and then it will just kind of blow up onto it and kind of help to dry it out a little bit more. But yeah, that's how I do my blocking. Again, either method works. I know a lot of people really like to do the steaming. I like to just submerge it and then put it on the block, but either way works. It just depends on your personal preference. And I will say too, I think it would be fine to also submerge it and not use the Knit IQ Delicate Wash. I think it would be fine just to do it with regular water. I just like to put it in the wash because I feel like the yarn, you know, it's been in the store, it's been everywhere. It's sometimes just gets a little bit, I don't know, dusty, dirty, something. So I like to just kind of like rinse it off. Basically use that as a nice rinse, condition the fibers a little bit, maybe make it a little bit softer, but you don't have to if you do not want to. Okay, after I block my piece, I then will attach my dowel to the piece. I will walk you through how to do that in the tutorial section of this. And then the last, I guess there's two last pieces. One is making a hanger so that you are able to hang up your piece on the wall. You can do you can do this in multiple ways. I previously have done where I have basically 2 strands that come up and then kind of back again. Definitely can be doable, very easy to do, doesn't require a lot of time. You can do that. And then just secure it really well on both sides. Another way would be to chain a stitch and then just attach it back on this side. That's another great way. Again, pretty easy. What I like to do is make an I-cord actually. I think it gives the project it makes it look a little bit cleaner, nicer. And I just use my I-cord maker to do that. And then I just sew it onto each side. Now, I will say with the I-cord maker, it can sometimes be deceptive how long the cord is going to be. So a lot of times I've ended up pulling out a lot of the I-cord that I just made to make it shorter. So just keep that in mind as well if you don't need it to be that long. So those are 3 options to make your hanger. We already talked about attaching a second dowel. The last thing would be you could add fringe at the bottom if you wanted to. The fringe can be whatever size you would like. This one is obviously like a little bit longer, but you can, usually I like to double the strands. So really what you're going to do is just cut out, figure out how many stitches are on the bottom of your project. Like I said, for mine, it's usually 60. Double that number and then cut out that many strands of yarn and then make sure they're all the same size. Sometimes obviously it can get a little wonky. A lot of times I have to give my project a little haircut at the end just to make sure that they're all even. Definitely something you could do. You could also take out, if you have a sewing mat with the kind of heavy plastic ruler that you use with it for cutting fabric, you could put that on there and cut a nice straight even line across all of your fringe. As you'll see with this one, like this, I don't know what happened with this yarn, but it is all kinds of like curly kooky. So for one like this, it might be kind of hard to do that method. I would probably just give it a haircut. That's what I ended up doing with this one. It was really kooky and weird. It kind of had a big dip in the middle because I wasn't cutting them all the right size. So I ended up giving it a haircut. I think it could still even use a further haircut, but that is what you can do. Again, you don't have to add fringe if you don't want to. You can also unravel the yarn to give it more of a like curly kind of fringy, like even more fringy look. That can definitely be a little bit overwhelming and it takes a long time to unravel all of those. So just keep that in mind. But that's pretty much it for my pattern. Just a quick note about being nice to creators. Like, if you use my pattern and you decide to sell it in small quantities, I'm totally for that. You can definitely post it on your website, but please just credit me saying that I made the pattern. And same thing, if you post it on social media, just tag my socials so that people can find me and find the pattern if they would like to make it themselves. So with that being said, we are going to get into the tutorial section of this. We're going to talk about how to do color changes. We're going to talk about how to attach a dowel, and I'll kind of walk you through briefly how to make some fringe, even though it's not too complicated. We'll talk through those 3 things just so that you have a good idea of how to get started, do your color changes. And okay, so let's do our tutorial. This might be, hopefully it's not too janky. My other tripod is not working, so I'm using my kind of around the neck phone holder, so I apologize if it's a little bit shaky. But I wanted to talk you through kind of first how to do a chain stitch and then go into the back bumps of the chain. Then we'll talk about doing some color changes. So I'm actually just going to take this gold yarn, and again, in order to do tapestry, you should really have down some of the basics of crochet. So if you don't, I would definitely try to work on some of those before trying to do something with a lot of color changes. But for tapestry, I'll just do a short chain just to show you, but we'll first make a slip knot. Okay, we'll first make a slip knot, and then we are going to chain, we'll just do like 5 or 6, maybe a few more. Okay, so when I'm talking about going into the back bumps, so here you can see this is our first stitch, and then this right here is the back bump of that stitch. This is the second stitch, and we are going to go into that back bump. So in through the back, and there should only be one loop over your hook. The V should be on the back of your hook. You'll yarn over and finish out the single crochet. So that is how you kind of start off your project. We just go to the end here. You can see another back bump here. One thing that's really helpful, I think, is to just double check your counting before you start out your first row. So make sure you've chained the correct amount of stitches. And then also just as you're going through and doing your first row of your first row of single crochet, again, just count up and make sure you have the number that you need. I'm notorious for not chaining the right number correctly, doing the whole first row and then starting on my pattern, and then I can't figure out why my pattern isn't working, and it's because I didn't even start the correct way. So this is what your first row would look like, and then again, once you get to the end of each row, you'll chain 1, turn your project, and then skip that first chain, go into the first single crochet, and then you will just go back down the row again. So it's really as simple as that. As far as the kind of stitches go and how you kind of set up the project. However, the tricky part comes when we are trying to do color changes. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I started a tapestry project here. It's going to say welcome. Sorry, you can't see it very well, but it's going to say welcome to Friendsgiving. So I have my pattern over to the right of me. I'm not going to show it to you just because I am going to sell this project. This pattern, so you can find it on my website. If you're one of the first people to watch this video, it may not be on my website yet, but I will be getting it up soon. I know that Thanksgiving is right around the corner, so it might be a little late, but I did the graph, so I'll probably just get it posted and then hopefully maybe get some traction next year. But on my last row, I already did the chain 1, so I am just going to turn my project, and I need to start off with 6 single crochets. So it is really testing my skills because I may be going slow for you, and I'm really sorry about that, but I'm trying to do this as I'm looking through. I'm just like looking at my phone screen, so it is more complicated than and I'm talking, but it's more complicated than just doing it regularly. Okay, so we needed to do 6 of these tan stitches first. I did not finish off the last stitch because I need to change color before the next stitch, because the next stitch needs to be brown. So I'm going to take the end of my brown yarn. Okay, I'm going to take the end of my brown yarn, and basically what I'm going to do is just drape it over my crochet hook. So the tail will be on the top, and the working yarn will be just like it should be any other time. It's going to be coming over this kind of, if you're looking at your hook, the left side of the hook. I'm just going to pull this color through. Now, something important as you're doing your color changes, I like to leave like a little bit of a longer tail just so it doesn't slip out. We will be crocheting over, but just like to keep that out. I also like to pull on the pull on the working tail of the color that you just got rid of to kind of tighten everything up. So what I like to do as I'm changing color, especially as I'm attaching a new color to my project, is I like to go over those stitches. So I need to do 3 of these. So in order to just kind of hold this brown in place, I'm going to place 3 stitches. And as you can see, this yarn tail is going to be stuck in the middle of my stitch. So it's not going to be left out. It's going to kind of be anchored a little bit by adding these stitches around it. Now, I only need 3 brown stitches. So I am going to go like this, and then I'm going to move both of these yarn tails to the back of my work. So again, this is going to be the right side of my work. This is going to be the pretty side. This is going to be the wrong side. So these tails are going to go into the back. I need to pick up my ivory again, and I will yarn over and pull through. Similar to when we changed to the brown color, I'm going to grab onto my yarn tail, or my working yarn, and pull on the back of it just so that it kind of tightens the stitch, and then pull on the ivory one again. So kind of a double pull on the color you just switched from, and then pull on the color you'll be using. And then I actually only need 1 stitch, so it'll be really quick color change again. And I will pull these 2, this tail may not always be there, but I will pull on my ivory one, hold that down with my index finger, yarn over, pull through. So now I have my brown ready to go. I have 3 more brown stitches. Okay, and then we will go back to the ivory. So again, I will pull on my brown just to tighten it around my hook. I will pull on my ivory, yarn over, and pull through. Now, one thing to kind of note as you're doing color passes, so when you have to move the colored yarn, one of your colors of yarn kind of across multiple stitches, you want to make sure it's tight but not too tight, especially if you're going a long way across the project. So eventually I might have to go from say here to here. You don't want to pull it too tight because otherwise your project is going to start curling like this. One thing I do sometimes do, especially if I have to go a long ways across the project, I will snip the middle of the yarn after I have kind of done a few additional rows, just to make sure that my project isn't curling. But the one thing that you do need to kind of keep in mind is that if you do that, you're going to need to fasten those all of those ends back down, if that makes sense. And I can show you that on a separate project. So here you can see I had both this here I had this dark color gray, and then the pink that kind of had to go completely across the project multiple times. So what I was doing is I was cutting them in the middle and then tying them off on both sides. So you can see there's a bunch of knots here. Now for these knots, I knotted them 4 or 5 times just so that they would not come undone. That's something really important. I would also really, really, really strongly advise you not to do this method if you are making your color graph as part of a sweater. In that case, I would just try to weave in the ends, or just make sure you have a lot of just make sure that you haven't pulled the yarn super tightly. Make sure it is flush, kind of like these ones are. They are not tugging on the sides. They're kind of the perfect tension. That's definitely more important when making a sweater. But for something that's going to hang on the wall, I don't foresee this kind of completely unraveling. If someone put this in the wash, maybe it could, but hopefully this would just be going up on someone's wall and would not be messed with very much. So this method should be fine for something like a wall hanging tapestry. But again, make sure you're making many, many knots, 4 or 5, and then, trim off the excess and you should be good. But when trimming off the excess, don't make the tails too short. These tails are a little bit longer. As you can see, they're kind of fraying, so I think that will also help the knots not to necessarily pull out. But that is one way you can kind of help to mediate a lot of the crossing over that you'll need to do, especially the really long passes, just to make it a little bit cleaner and easier to work with. Okay, so that is basically how you would do a color change. One kind of thing to note, for a lot of my tapestries, I do like to cross over in the back. There is another method called Tunisian crochet, and that's where you hold all of the yarn kind of within the stitches, like we did when we first started with that yarn tail for the brown. When I am making tapestries, though, most of the time I have quite a lot of tails, so I don't necessarily want to be going over all of those tails all of the time. So just something to kind of keep in mind, but definitely that is a way you could do it, especially if you're only working with, maybe say 2 colors, it would easily work a lot better. One thing about going over the yarn tails too is that it will sometimes peek through the back. So just keep that in mind as you are trying out that method. I find that this method works really well for me. It doesn't look too terrible on the back, but obviously no one's hopefully going to be seeing the back of the project. If you really care about what the back of the project looks like, you could always add like a fabric on the back, either a felt kind of fabric or even just some plain fabric. You could get at Joann's or something like that, just to hide what the back looks like and make it a little bit nicer. So we finished this up. Next, I'm going to give you a quick tutorial about how to crochet around the dowel. So I'm just going to use some scrap pieces here. I have this short dowel that I had from before. Now, actually, okay. I'm going to attach it to my project, but I will take it off. So again, you'll make a slip knot and you would attach it in the top right corner of your work. So let's see, there we go. Just put it in that top stitch and yarn over and pull through the stitch and then the loop on the hook, chain 1, and then you're going to grab your dowel. And you need to make sure that the yarn is going to kind of pass over the dowel. So sometimes it takes me a minute when first getting started just to make sure that I'm doing it correctly. But I think what we want to do is we want to have the dowel kind of in between the work and the working yarn and the hook. So hopefully that makes sense. You want to have your working yarn coming up, your hook in the back, and the hook is through the stitch. You're going to yarn over, pull through your stitch, and as you can see, the yarn caught onto the dowel, which is what you want. And then you're just going to yarn over again and pull through both of those loops for a single crochet. And now you're set up in a way that this will continue to work. So you'll put your hook through the next stitch. You will yarn over, make sure again that yarn is going to encapsulate that dowel. Yarn over and pull through. So that is how you would add on the dowel. You would go all the way down to the end. Once you're at the end, just snip off and weave in the ends. You could also, before snipping off, again, you could either cut a long string to make your hanger. I would suggest at least doubling up the yarn if you're only going to use like a yarn strand method. Otherwise, you can chain stitch or make an I-cord and sew the I-cord onto either side of the project. And then the last thing, I'm not going to show you necessarily on this project yet, but in order to do the fringe, you're going to cut a long piece of string. Make sure that the string that you cut is double the length that you want the fringe to be, because it's going to be put in half. So you will have your, I'll demonstrate with this, I guess. You would have your string that you cut, you would fold it over, and then you would put your hook through one of the stitches. I'll just go through one of these ones. And as you can see, I did the back loop method like I showed earlier, so it's really easy to see those stitches. You would then pass the loop that you just created by folding the yarn in half, pull it through your project, and then you would take this and just wrap it around and pull the ends. This would be cut off here. You'd pull the ends through the project, and that would create your fringe. Now, just make sure that as you're doing it, you are sticking your hook in from the same side of the project. That way it all looks the same. So here you can see I passed the hook through the back and pulled the loop through, and then the loop came kind of up and around, and then I put the strings through on this side. So it gives two different looks. Whichever one you prefer, you can do. Just make sure that it is all the same. I actually, after looking at this, I actually kind of like the look of the back of this versus the front. So I might change up my method, and instead of putting my hook in through the back to pull the loop through, I might, for future projects, try to put the hook in through the front. Okay, so that is how you add the fringe. Okay, so that wraps up our tutorial. I think I covered everything. Hopefully you do not have any questions about how to do tapestry now. Hopefully it's pretty crystal clear. If you do have questions though, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be happy to reply and make maybe an additional video or something just to help reiterate different points. The only thing I didn't mention was kind of your yarn management as you're working on a project. If you have many different balls of yarn, it can get really tangly in the back because you're kind of crossing all of them over a lot. So definitely try to just keep your yarn manageable as you're going along. So take breaks to untangle, and sometimes I'll even use a method where if I have to change colors, I will swap the yarns. I sit them out in front of me and I'll swap them. That way things don't get, too tangly and unmanageable. If things get too tangly and unmanageable, feel free to chop off a color, but leave a long tail so you can weave it in, or sometimes if there's another tail close to it, I'll tie them together and then weave them in just so there's a little bit extra kind of hold, but feel free to cut tails off and restart. I like to do that, especially if I'm using a color, but maybe I'm not going to need to use it for multiple rows and I'm using a lot of different colors. A lot of times I will just cut it off and then reattach it later on. And again, so over those smaller tails that come when you attach the yarn in the beginning. So, like I said, I really hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you liked my I Need a Diet Coke pattern, you can find it on my website. I'm really excited to post this one. This was a really fun project. Again, not super difficult. Definitely quite a few color changes, but not too difficult at all. And a really kind of nice one to get started. I'll be posting some other seasonal ones as well. I'm currently working on this Friendsgiving one. I'm also going to work on a few Christmas ones, which will be really fun. So leave some comments down below if you also have other tapestry pattern ideas. I'm more than happy to make some graphs and test them out for you. So I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and thank you so much for spending some time with me today.